when AI is used to extend generosity or access, people tend to accept it more, but when it's used to manufacture meaning or simulate connection, that's when trust starts to erode.
Hit it! That's what I'm talking about. Wait!
Okay, now, from the beginning.
Hit it, boys.
Welcome to Higher Ed Pulse, your no-fluff guide to artificial intelligence in higher ed. I'm Mallory Willsea, bringing nearly 20 years of edtech and marketing expertise straight to your earbuds. Higher ed leaders are expected to master AI overnight, but let's be real, no one has time to sift through every headline, hot take, or research report. That's why every Monday, I'll break down what actually matters, fast, clear, and to the point. Want to sound like the smartest person in the room at your next team meeting? You're in the right place. Let's dive in. Welcome back to Higher Ed Pulse. On today's episode, we're getting very real about AI video. I've been hands-on with Sora, experimenting, pushing it, and honestly learning where it breaks. So today, we're breaking down where AI video actually adds value, where it quietly erodes trust, and why taste, not execution, is now the hardest part of the job. And joining me today is a very familiar name and face for a lot of you listening. Erin Fields is the marketing director at Ologie, where she helps lead content marketing and social strategy. But before that, Erin was right here with us as the marketing manager for the Enrollify network. So yes, she knows this space and this audience and this work inside and out, and she's spent more time with AI video tools than most people I know. So Erin, welcome to the Pulse.
Oh my gosh, thank you, Mal. It's like a little reunion.
I
was so excited when you reached out and was like, hey, do you want to be on Pulse? And I, without question, had to accept because you never decline an interview request with Mallory Willsea.
Oh, and episode 99 on
I know,
top of
you're
that.
so close to 100.
So close, listeners. I gotta say, next week's episode, not that this one's not a treat, but just wait for next week. That's all I'm gonna say now. All right, Erin, and I know you're a big gamer. We haven't caught up in a minute. I personally got lots of new card games for Christmas. I've been playing Dutch Blitz. It's been very fun. What are some of the games you're playing right now?
Oh yeah, so for all you gamers out there, I got a Switch 2 on release, and so that was like 6-7 months ago, and so I've been playing my Switch 2 nonstop. I'm a big Nintendo girly, so I'm playing like Pokemon Legends ZA. I'm a big Pokemon fan. But I mean, besides playing actual video games, I'm a really big like trading card game player as well. So, of course, I've been going to Pokemon tournaments. I picked up, One Piece trading card game for any anime fans out there. It's a great game. So I've been kind of keeping myself busy between video games and trading card games as my main hobbies.
So fun. Folks, if you want to nerd out with Erin on all things gaming, find her on LinkedIn. All right, we're going to get into our topic today, AI video. It has crossed the credibility threshold, and that is changing the job for us marketers. Tools like Sora aren't just generating novelty clips anymore. They're producing video that's good enough to force real decisions. And once video becomes fast and cheap, execution stops being the constraint. Taste and judgment now become the work. And the real advantage of AI video isn't lower production cost. It's faster thinking that is made visible. So for the first time, teams can explore tone, narrative, and visual language at speed before a campaign is locked and before money is spent. Now, what surprised me most is how often simpler prompts outperform clever ones in Sora. One clear idea, one moment, and that holds things together. But the second you over-direct AI video, in my experience, coherence starts to fall apart the same way it does with bad creative direction to humans. As realism improves, brand risk rises. The closer AI video gets to real, the less forgiving our audiences will become. Transparency is not going to be a legal checkbox. It's going to actually act like a trust signal here. Now, there are campaigns like Cadbury India's AI-powered personalization, and that worked because they amplify real businesses, they disclosed the technology being used, and they never pretended to represent anything lived or real. The AI stood in for production, not for reality. And I'm dropping a link to that in the show notes. Higher education, we're not chocolate. We play a different game. It's credibility that's built on proximity to real people, outcomes, and moments. When AI videos start standing in for real experience instead of helping teams think, I don't think the cost is how it looks. It's the loss of trust. So this episode isn't about whether to use AI video. It's about where it belongs in the workflow, who should control it, and why the brands that win will treat it like infrastructure. All right, Erin, before we get into the implications and the risks, I actually just want to start simplistically with how people are using these tools. Because honestly, over the holidays, that's where it got really fun for me as I was experimenting with Sora. So take us back to the day. When did you start using AI video and what kinds of things have you been making with it?
Yeah, so I started using AI video, I would say honestly, when Sora was first released to the public, back in December 2024. I was a very early user and adopter for Sora. I was really excited. And I think I should say up front, first and foremost, that I personally do not use it for actual execution in my day-to-day work. I use it for fun. And so that was also especially true for me over Christmas when Sora released Sora 2, the new model, along with a new iOS app. You previously couldn't use Sora before. You could only use it on, a web browser, which meant, suddenly it's in your hands in a much more casual and playful way that's, you're out experiencing things. You have this idea, okay, I can go ahead and use Sora to make an idea that I have. So I couldn't wait when that app came out to just get in there and just see what it can do. But at the same time, at work, actually at Ologie, we were working on an internal creative zine at the agency. And because this issue was coming out during the holidays, the idea was that everyone could kind of create a spread, kind of as a gift to everybody else. And so I got assigned my person, and I'm told, they like baking, they're a foodie, they're into history, and then word for word, this person says, I'm into outrageous AI videos. And so I started there, and I began making these really playful historical parody videos using Sora. So stuff like turning major historical events into action figure sets, and then treating them kind of as a little bit of early 2000s toy commercials. Think of kind of what you'd see on Nickelodeon at 4:00 p.m. After school, you're chilling eating a bowl of cereal. Stuff like that. So it's not what I ultimately ended up gifting that person for the zine spread, but it was definitely an absolute blast to explore. And more importantly, I think it reinforced something for me very early on that, like you said in the intro, AI video is best when you're using it to let it be exploratory and a little bit weird and kind of low stakes. I don't know if you've ever seen them, Mal, but for whatever reason on my social media feed, I keep getting these videos of people using AI to make fruit and stuff in the glass and the felt, and then a knife just cuts it, and it's which one do you like the best? And it's kind of weird. So for whatever reason, those keep posting on my feed, but I don't know if you've ever seen those or not.
I haven't. I'll say, though, the release of the app is what launched me into using Sora. I admittedly had never really used it that much, maybe once or twice in 2025 before that app launched. And so I was telling you this before we hit record, but I went down a pretty deep rabbit hole building animal characters in the Blossom universe. So shout out to my episodes with Cora Budd if you have not listened to them. I had an 8-year-old on my podcast at the end of the year last year, and we kind of talked about all the ways she uses AI and how we play and have created this whole universe around my dog with AI. Oh, Erin, we have just taken it up a notch now with Sora. I gotta tell you, we're making characters of all of these pets now and short stories, and it's allowed me to really test what this thing can do and not do. None of this was for work. Right, this was just pure exploration, but very quickly I started noticing some patterns. Longer prompts were resulting in really bad videos, and the voices are always the wrong gender and they speak too quickly. Blossom had an extra nose at one point. None of it is perfect. So I'm kind of curious, because you have had so much more experience with this than I have. Once you have moved past that initial like, oh, this is cool, I can like put my dog in the Caribbean with a margarita, like you move past the initial fun of that, and you start to push the tool a bit more. Like, where do you see AI video starting to just kind of fall apart creatively?
I think once you start noticing like where the tools fall apart, I think the restraint of it stops feeling like creative philosophy and more like self-preservation in a way. Because the more that you try to over-direct AI video, the more obvious its limits do become, because you're essentially asking it to be very precise in places where it honestly just isn't. And that's when you get outputs that feel a little brittle or uncanny or overworked in a way that's really hard to ignore. Like all of a sudden, like you cross your legs and you're getting a fourth leg or something like that, or you have your pants just become like a skirt, something like that. So like when you back off a little bit and you give it space to breathe and space to interpret instead of prescribing every single little detail, the work tends to get more interesting and honestly a little bit more usable, which is honestly a little bit of an odd paradox, because when we're prompting things like ChatGPT, it's like,
yes,
okay, be as specific as you possibly
Bingo.
can. Mm-hmm. And it's so weird because it's the exact opposite with something like Sora. Like when it's got too much to process, it doesn't know what to focus on. And so I think like that's what it starts to say about like bigger creative judgment. Good creative work, I feel like, has really never been about control for its own sake. It's really about knowing when to apply pressure and where to let things breathe, trusting your taste enough to intervene selectively with certain things instead of trying to manage every single outcome into submission. And so like I think about how we do the right amount of work in the right places, right? In an environment where tools can generate endless variations at like incredible speeds, the value shifts away from who can make the most things toward who knows when to stop, when to step in, and when to say, okay, like this is interesting, but it's not totally right or accurate.
Yeah. I was just saying to someone earlier today that, in this AI era that we are in, like marketing's job is no longer about creating volumes, like volume of things. It's not about creating more and more and more. It's about knowing, like, it's about understanding restraint and choosing fewer bets and, right, saying no to the things that aren't working and investing in the things that are. And I feel like you're kind of echoing that kind of higher level thinking, but like very specifically within the context of AI video. And yeah, like to your point on the kind of like the flip flop that we mentally have to take with the prompting, like I try getting so specific, like the first 3 seconds are this, the next 3 seconds are that. And like, that's when the videos got really, really bad. If I was just saying a simple prompt like create an interesting story about Blossom and Twilight skiing, then it was magic. Like it was great. I loved it. Right. It just, simpler was just better. That was a big learning that I had. Any other, like from your exploration days, any other kind of learnings at that level?
I think it's like, this might kind of just be like, duh, but I think being patient with the software, I think just because you can make something in there doesn't mean you should make something in there. With great power comes great responsibility is what they say in Spider-Man, and I think that same logic and principles apply here as well.
So it's clear that like our bottleneck has moved, right? 'Cause like I remember when I was working on a campus, in the pre-AI ages, like,
oh man, that was so long ago.
It was a long time ago when I was working on a campus, but like anything in the pre-AI age, like execution was like the hard part, and like kind of isn't anymore. Creating a video was really hard once upon a time. And so if execution is no longer the constraint, like where's the real creative work living now?
That's a really good point, because I definitely agree that the bottleneck has shifted, and not really in a subtle way. Like you said, execution used to be the thing that slowed every single thing down, which in hindsight, it did a lot of the quiet work for us. It forced decisions, it created friction, it made teams commit to a direction earlier than maybe they would have wanted to. But now that I think that execution is faster and cheaper, that friction is pretty much gone, I would say, for the most part, and what's left left is kind of this slightly uncomfortable realization that the work didn't disappear, but it really just moved upstream. And so I think the real creative work lives in how you frame the problem and deciding what's worth making in the first place, and then being clear in what you're actually trying to say, kind of before you actually start saying it in 100 different ways. Because that's the temptation with AI, right? Like, I can personalize it in 20,000 different ways. I think there's also this kind of discipline that's required because you can make almost anything really quickly. And so the temptation to keep generating instead of deciding is always going to be there, and kind of a new issue that we haven't had to really deal with in marketing before. And so to stay in exploration mode forever because it feels productive even when it's not, I think is going to be kind of a big issue for marketing teams going forward now. And that's where judgment starts to matter more than the output. So in this environment, I think for me as a marketer and someone who's kind of like in the middle of my career right now, I think an underrated skill is going to be knowing when an idea is strong enough to commit to, when it needs more thought, and then on the flip side of that, knowing when something should probably just be alone or cut out or omitted entirely.
Yeah. Here's a quick word from our sponsor. Southeast Missouri State University needed to launch more targeted campaigns faster, yet they were bogged down by manual campaign builds, slow approvals, and vendor overload. With Element 451, they eliminated 5 vendor tools and gained marketing superpowers in one platform. They saw a 13% increase in applications, processed applications within 2 days, and achieved 33 to 35% email open rates. The impact, personalized, automated campaigns running at scale without the drag. Ready to turn your next campaign around in hours, not weeks? Try an agent today at element451.com/agents. So I want to kind of test all the things we are talking about with a real example. And I'll say this is probably my favorite example that I've seen. In prep for today's conversation, I was, kind of scouring the internet in terms of like, where has AI video already been applied? And there are some cases, right? And in India, Cadbury partnered with Ologie and Wavemaker to create more than 100,000 personalized videos featuring the Bollywood star Shah Rukh Khan. Now, each ad dynamically promoted a real local business by name, was disclosed as AI generated, which I think, like asterisks, very important that they did that. And it was designed to support smaller shops that just, absolutely would never have the budget to maybe even create this type of advertisement, first of all, but certainly not to get, a big Bollywood star. And you know what? It worked. It has positive, it landed really well with the audience. And like I said, I popped a link in the show notes. So folks, if you're not familiar with this campaign, you can go learn more about it and take a closer look. But Erin, I sent this over to you a couple days ago, so you would have a chance to take a look too, if you hadn't seen it already. As you looked at that, what's your analysis here? And why do you think Cadbury's approach worked when maybe some of these other ones out in the wild haven't?
It was more about intent. I think the temptation with AI is you're moving too fast. You can do whatever you want, whenever you want, and you can get it out as fast as, you can create a campaign in an hour, really, in today's time. And so you think about the strategy and the intent behind the ad and why that worked. Just because we can create something faster doesn't mean that we can just abandon strategy. That still needs to be the foundation of every campaign. Everything that you're putting out needs to be tied to strategy. But that campaign came out in a very real moment during COVID, when small businesses across India were getting really hit hard, like a lot of places around the world. And, instead of using AI to make brands louder, they really used it to make room for, local businesses, other people. And so they brought in the influencer who is already a trusted and a familiar presence, and they really used AI to help him essentially point outward, asking people to shop locally so that money would be continuously put back into that community during those hard times. And so The personalization really wasn't trying to simulate a real relationship or pretend that these were documentary moments. You know, the AI made it possible to scale that gesture, and it allowed thousands of small business owners to generate versions of an ad that, you know, named their own store and share them locally without pretending that that influencer had personally recorded hundreds of thousands of videos, you know? And so I think that clarity is why it worked in tandem with the intent. The technology stayed in the background, the intent stayed in the foreground, and the personalization added value without crossing into false intimacy. And so it applied something real that was already happening in the world. And I think that brings me to this point that when AI is used to extend generosity or access, people tend to accept it more versus when it's used to manufacture meaning or simulate connection. That's when trust starts to erode.
Oh, I love that. Say that again. What was that? When AI extends generosity, like I need that soundbite, Erin.
When AI is used to extend generosity or access, people tend to accept it more, but when it's used to manufacture meaning or simulate connection, that's when trust starts to erode.
Ooh, make that the cold open. Like that's it. I love that. So someone listening though is like inevitably thinking in the back of their mind, like, y'all, higher ed's not selling chocolate, right? Like, okay, you're right. Yep, we're not selling Cadbury eggs. It's fine. So there are some lines and some guardrails that higher ed has to put up that maybe Cadbury doesn't, and that is very fair. So what are some of those lines that you feel like higher ed just can't cross, even if the tech makes it easy and tempting?
Yeah, I mean, I think the Cadbury example is useful here when comparing because the outcome, like I said, aligns so clearly with the intent. And so the general public probably wasn't thinking about machine learning or personalization mechanics when they saw those ads, right? But what they did see was a very familiar figure encouraging them to support local businesses at that moment because that support genuinely mattered at that time. So even if viewers didn't know that how the ads were made at the time, whether they saw the disclosure or not, nothing about them asked people to believe in a moment that hadn't happened. And so when you think about that, higher ed is very different than that because so much of its storytelling asks audiences to trust representations of experiences. And so you think about things like student life, learning environments, outcomes, what's going on campus, like those are just to name a few. That line absolutely cannot be crossed using AI video because to create the appearance of those experiences when they weren't actually lived, witnessed, or documented crosses a very sketchy line that higher ed does not want to cross. And I think that, you know, there's this long history of wanting to paint, in higher ed anyway, a very specific picture of who the ideal student is, what the ideal experience looks like, and how neatly it all fits together. So we build personas, you know, we define pathways, we try to box students into categories that feel really manageable, even though the actual pool of students pursuing education are far more complex, contradictory, and expansive than a persona could ever capture. And so I think AI makes that temptation even stronger because it suddenly becomes very easy in a few seconds to visualize a version of higher ed that marketing teams wish were universally true. So you think about things like the perfectly engaged student with like a 4.0 or, you know, that's on the president's list, or you think of someone starting an application very seamlessly where they start it in the morning and then by like 6 p.m. they submit the application in one day and so on and so forth. And so like that is where the line is for me. It's that higher ed cannot use AI video to manufacture or stand in for experiences that it's unwilling to show honestly. It can't use AI to smooth over the messiness, the diversity, the non-linear paths that actually define how people move through education. And so in higher ed, where credibility is already very fragile in today's time, that quiet disconnect does cause real damage over time. And so institutions start representing a version of student life that fewer and fewer students actually recognize themselves in. And I think that students may not be able to name exactly why something might feel off, but they would definitely feel that kind of distance. So truly, I think in the long run, it's not about whether people understand the tech, it's about whether the story asks them to believe something that is or isn't grounded in real experience.
I feel like just thinking about the use cases that are going to happen, you know, have already happened over the past years since Sora's release, will continue to happen. You know, I don't really see institutions like publishing videos with fake people in them. As much as I see kind of two clear use cases, one, like anything public, like actually published, is probably going to be more like drone type footage, because that's expensive, like to go get. It's less expensive than it once was, certainly. But like, I think that's probably a more publishable immediate use case. But I really think, like, if I was leading a marketing team right now on a campus, I would be using Sora to help me ideate, right? It would be really far like up in my process. And that would be where I would spend my time. Like, it would give me a chance to like test some concepts and actually see them in a test. And as a visual learner, that would resonate with me. And then I'd be able to go to my, video team on campus or my video partner with, better formulated opinions and thoughts and ideas and things like that. I don't know. Any thoughts on that, Erin?
Yeah, that's absolutely a good point. You think about how I feel like, we talk about silos on higher ed all the time. You think about the silo, especially that's between, a creative department versus maybe strategist. And so for the first time, I feel like there's now this tangible way where strategists can be able to visualize that strategy or that tactic and give that to the creative team and vice versa. And so I feel like it now creates this bridge between the two teams that wasn't there before.
Yeah. I think there's another risk in all of this, and it is the risk of sameness. Higher ed already struggles with that, that sameness around like, oh, you could slap this tagline on any institution's website and it would be true, or we're all the best kept secret with the world-class faculty, et cetera, right? So like, AI video, just like all things AI, like it's trained on existing content. So higher ed as an industry already struggling with this. Like, what if our industry just starts accepting all the defaults? Like, I don't think it's going to happen at, like that far end of the spectrum, but I don't know. I feel like sameness is going to be a challenge.
Yeah, and I think like that's, as a creative myself, that's the part that kind of worries me quietly, because it doesn't show up as a single decision. I think it's something that shows up slowly over time. Like you said, AI video is trained on what already exists, which means it's very good at reproducing dominant aesthetics and very bad at questioning them. And so higher ed already has a long history of kind of converging on sometimes the same visual language. You think about a higher ed brand, it can, be a very dominant force when it comes to, a very protected visually, I think. And so the real risk is that as these tools get easier and faster and teams kind of start accepting those defaults because they're convenient. And, higher ed loves a good template. If it worked once, they ship it again and again and again. But when everyone is pulling from the same underlying visual assumptions, everything kind of starts to blur together. And you really stop being able to tell who a piece of content is for or where it's really coming from, because it could belong to almost anyone at that point. And that's a huge miss in marketing. I was taught in college from a very early point in my career that if you try to talk to everyone, then you were talking to no one. And so AI can scale patterns incredibly well. And this is why people love to call out a lot of AI tropes when it comes to things like copywriting. You think of M dashes, negative to positive sentence structure, and so forth. And I do think that eventually people will be able to nail down patterns in image and video creation too, but people just haven't spent enough time being able to recognize those patterns yet. And breaking them still requires humans who know what they're looking at and who care enough to push back when something feels fine but not entirely true or right or, the same.
I do wonder what the AI video version of the M dash joke is going to be.
Yeah, I know. When are we going to move past like our 3-leg jokes and move into something like
That's it. Yes, that's it. All right. So, Erin, as we wrap this up, if you were advising a CMO on a campus, what is a boundary that you would tell them they need to set with AI video this year?
To me, I think the boundary I'd set is honestly a pretty simple one, even though it's not always easy to hold. And this kind of goes back to a little bit of the conversation we had between creatives and strategists. AI can be incredibly useful upstream. It's a great way for teams to explore ideas together, like we talked about, to test those visual directions early, to get strategists and creative in the same room looking at the same thing before anything real actually gets made. Strategists can see how an idea can translate visually, and creatives on the opposite side of that can engage with intent much earlier in that process. And that kind of shared exploration can reduce a lot of the handoff friction that higher ed marketing teams are very familiar with. But that usefulness does come with a boundary. AI video shouldn't be allowed to stand in as lived experiences, like I was mentioning earlier. That the moment that it starts representing students' classrooms' outcomes or moments that weren't actually witnessed, that trade-off stops making sense and becomes unethical, in my opinion. So whatever efficiency gain that you gain short-term gets paid back later in credibility, and that's not a debt that higher ed can afford to carry. Especially in a sector that already struggles with things like trust and differentiation, the safest move isn't to see how far technology can go here, it's to be very clear about where it stops. And so, AI can help you imagine what a story might look like, but humans at the end of the day still have to be responsible for deciding what's true, what's appropriate for our brands, and what's worth showing another person. That part isn't the part that has to get automated.
Yeah, word. So just as an AI enthusiast, Erin, what are you most looking forward to, video or not, in 2026?
In terms of specifically AI?
Yeah. A new use case you're exploring, or a tool you've heard that you want to check out?
Yeah, so something that, and I'll give like a little nugget of something that like absolutely game changed me for AI at the end of 2025 that I will always carry with me to my grave now, as long as
okay.
I love going to conferences. I learned so much from them, and even hearing like our ologists speak at, for example, at AMA. And so what I'll do is that I will record our own sessions in my phone notes as a voice memo, and then I will go and I will take that transcript and I will upload it to Notebook LM, and I will use it kind of as a study guide, ask questions about the content, how can we best, do this with our strategy, stuff like that. And I can actually very much well interact with that content better than if I'm like ferociously typing notes, because then I can actively listen to the speaker and get those notes later. So that's something that I started doing at the end of 2025 that I am going to carry with me literally for the rest of my life. Forever, truly.
Super pro tip. I love that. Everybody at these conferences now are going to be recording the sessions on their phones. But I think that's so smart. Get the transcript. And then break it down.
Well, the note to that, make sure you have permission to record the session. And don't
Bingo.
do it without permission, please.
Bingo. All right. This was so much fun. Erin, where can folks find you?
You can find me on LinkedIn, Erin Fields.
Of course.
I started posting on LinkedIn 6 months ago at this point. So I post a lot of admissions and marketing content, enrollment marketing. If you want to reach out to me about whether it's AI or anything with marketing, you can feel free to connect and message me on LinkedIn. I'd love to chat with you.
Love that. Well, thank you so much for your time today, Erin. And folks, get ready for episode 100 next week. We'll have some familiar faces and some hot takes on this podcast. We'll see you next time. Bye-bye.
Thanks for listening to the Higher Ed Pulse. The show is a proud member of the Enrollify Network, home to Higher Ed's largest collection of podcasts. Enrollify is where higher ed goes to grow, so be sure to check out our other podcasts, webinars, video clips, blogs, and more. Visit Enrollify.org and subscribe for all the latest details and content drops directly to your inbox. Enrollify is brought to you by Element 451, the digital workforce platform for higher ed. Learn more at element451.com.